Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another live session by Outdoor Wilderness and Learning. OWL in short, we call it. OWL is an initiative of the wanderers in the learning and development space. We conduct specialized training and workshops, and we have partnered with highly experienced trainers and facilitators to help corporate create winning teams. OWL also serves as a platform for eminent speakers and facilitators. You have been listening to our webcast and webinars, or whatever you can call them, online since the month of June. It's been an effort to help individuals and organizations make sense of this new world. And thereby today, in one of our interactive talks, which we call it one-on-one, with eminent speakers and personalities who share their perspective on life, business, wellness. And today, the session is about the art of public speaking and storytelling. Don't you think that it's important to learn stories from a master whose stories have been viewed over 10 million times on the internet? It is my honor and privilege to introduce Captain Raghu Raman. Captain Raman's unique career profile has enabled him to learn, practice, and teach first principles of organizational dynamics, strategy, transformations, and the mindset shift that is needed to lead in a complex and ever-changing world. He is a thought leader and an outstanding keynote speaker. And he has personally trained and mentored many distinguished people. He has empowered them and initiated them in the art of storytelling and public speaking. By the way, Captain Raman has been a guiding light in many organizations, and his talks have been watched over 10 million times. They have influenced lives and many individuals. You know, he was in the army for a decade, and yet, despite such a powerful army experience, he was able to make powerful headway in the corporate world. He started off his career with the Mahindra Group and ended his stint with Reliance Industries as a president. Plus, he was the founding CEO of the National Intelligence Grid, aka NATGRID, And imagine, right from the authoritarian style of the armed forces to the incentive-driven predominance in corporates, and being able to handle the bureaucratic style in the government. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our next speaker, the charismatic, the inspiring, the powerful, the young, and dynamic Captain Raghu Raman. Good morning, Captain. How are you today? So he's,
One second.
Yeah, no problem. Great.
Yeah. Thanks, Satan. So thank you, Rajendra. I think all those adjectives you gave before my name must have, caused Zoom also to say storytelling.
Young and dynamic.
Yeah. So thanks a ton, Rajendra, for organizing this, and thank you very much for all the people who are participating. The idea of this whole project that we put together came a few months ago when the lockdown actually started.
Yeah.
And at that point of time, you want to mute yourself, Rajendra, because otherwise I'll get an echo back. So what happened was a lot of my colleagues, friends, leaders, including many people with whom Rajendra and OWL has worked in the past, they realized that now a lot of their communication will have to happen the way it's happening right now. We'll have to communicate, through Zoom and various other medium. It's going to be online communications and online leadership. Basically, you'll have to lead organizations, pull them out of this, the demoralized state that they will be in. If they are not already, they will be in a few quarters. And when times are tough, crisis is around us, in any crisis, eventually, if you have to pull the team out of that crisis, you have to pull them out of that mindset, the first thing that has to change is the morale, the sense of, yeah, we can do it, we'll make it happen. That has to come first. And that doesn't come with slides. It doesn't come with numbers. It doesn't come by showing that we have 43% market share and we'll go to 47%. It doesn't come. It has to come from inspirational narratives, inspirational stories. So increasingly what happened was I was being called, as I am, fortunately, to many such organizations to do a keynote talk or a motivational speech or something along those lines. And a lot of my friends actually started saying that, listen, it's one thing to bring somebody in, and which is a fair point. It's one thing to bring somebody in to do a keynote, and that can be done once in a quarter, once in 6 months, once in a year, in an annual event or whatever. But I think the eventual responsibility of inspiring people, inspiring teams, creating an organization that is vibrant, that people feel, yeah, buddy, yeah, we can do this, we can make it happen. That can't be outsourced. It can't be outsourced to a keynote motivational speaker once in a year. It's not going to happen. This has to happen on a daily basis. And more importantly, this has to become the culture of the organization, where the organizational history, the core values of the organization, what we stand for, what we are going to, what's our vision, all of that needs to be translated into simple stories that can be told. And basically stories will carry this into the organization. Now, the art of public speaking, storytelling, making presentations, these are very, very loosely used labels. And I think the first thing we have to do is to clarify very clearly, like, when I was in my earlier avatar, people would say terrorist, insurgent, infiltrator, all of that, as if it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. Each one is a different character, and each one has a different characteristic and has to be. Insurgent is very, very different from a terrorist, is very different from an infiltrator. So these are very, very different components. Similarly, in public speaking is something else. The art of storytelling is something else. And it's usually confused. A lot of people get confused that what does storytelling mean? I stand with the PPT and I, read out the slides. Is that storytelling? Is public speaking going in? I've done many public speeches. What does that mean? I've gone in front of the podium, put my document there and read it out. And that is public speaking. So this is not about that. This is about going into the essence. We are going to go into the root of where this all begins and how I will prove to you, hopefully in the next half an hour, 45 minutes, I'll prove to you that your investment in yourself, in the ability to tell stories well, will probably be the most important leadership tool that you will ever have. And not only will I prove it to you with logic, but I will also prove it to you with evidence of people who have done that right in front of you. You can actually, even as I'm at that stage, you can Google and actually find the evidence that I'm going to tell you. So let me begin by, I'm going to use a PPT. This is more, as many of you who might have attended, some of you who might have attended my sessions know, the PPT is more for me to hold as a story point. It's really not the important thing. And that's the way it should be. Remember that. Any art form, public speaking, art of storytelling, it's called the art of storytelling. Remember, any art form actually is between you and your spectator, listener, or whatever. So if you're a dance performer, when you dance or when you sing, it's not which mic you're using, it's not which speakers are being used, it's not what attire you're wearing. It is you and the audience, or you and the speaker. So the PowerPoint presentation or whatever PPT you want to use or whatever should just be that. It should just be a placeholder to do some narrative. So I'm going to use it for a little bit. And like always, I like that sentence. Some of you might have heard it, those who were in programming many years ago, that C language was written in C language. What that essentially means is that if I'm doing this session as a storytelling introduction, then I should follow the principles that are supposed to be fundamental to that. So I will try and do that. And when the session is finished, I'll try and come back to some of those nuances and explain to you how we can create an engaging, and it is important now, more important now, because no matter how powerful a leader you are, when you do a live town hall or a live meeting or a live pitch or whatever, out of sheer decency, people have to at least pretend to be awake. They have to listen to you and, at least open their eyes and keep nodding their head once in a while, even if they have disengaged. I'm not saying they do that, but I'm saying that they have no option but to be. Online right now, I know there are a few hundred people listening, but if they don't feel engaged within the first 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, they will find other things to do. And even if I had authority over them, all he needs to do is to put on his picture over there and go and do whatever he wants to do and come back. So the ability to engage now becomes critical. It is not something a nice to have feature. It is now existential. So with that, let me just begin with this. So let me start by first looking at what we will discuss. So we'll discuss firstly why storytelling is one of the most important tools in the arsenal of a leader, the most important tool, I think. Second, we will also discuss that like everything that is, every art form, every engineering form, everything, it has an architecture behind it. Like music has 7 notes and it has various different gharanas, it has various different categories, it has various different styles. If you look at Western music, it has various. Now, all of these have architectures, whether it's poetry, a sonnet has an architecture, a poem has an architecture, everything has an architecture, and so does storytelling. We'll talk about the architecture. I also want to discuss, I'll come to that in the next slide, where I talk about when we say storytelling, these are 2 different things, 2 completely different things. That is why when you go to see a movie, the story is written by a script writer and the telling is done by a director, because these are completely different skills. I'm not saying that these 2 skills cannot be in the same person, as you see many directors who are written and directed by so-and-so, but these are 2 distinct skills. So we have to be aware of that while the word may be storytelling, but crafting a story is completely a different architecture from telling the story. And we will see why that happens. Then I will also talk about this project that we are very excited about doing. It's called Project Katha. The name obviously comes from a story. Some of you might remember that old Hindi movie. It's not like the movie. It's a better project. So we'll talk about that project, and I'll hopefully take you through some steps of that, which you might be able to even start doing literally tomorrow morning. So with that, let me now cover the fundamentals of story and telling. Now, given that we don't have that much time, I'm going to focus a lot more on the story architecture, because that is something that you can work on your own. Telling usually requires some hand-holding and some coaching. It's a bit like learning how to swim. So you can learn the theory of swimming and buoyancy and how to hold your breath and all of that. But swimming actually requires you to be in the pool with somebody who can teach you how to do that. So I'm going to focus more on story, and I'll cover telling in a slightly shorter format. And of course, in question answers, we can talk more in detail about this. Now, one of the primary reasons why I think storytelling is going to be a critical leadership trait, critical existential leadership trait, is the way leadership itself is evolving. If you go back a couple of decades, most of the organizations were largely authoritarian. So typically you joined as a management trainee and you worked your way right up to the top. You joined as a graduate engineer trainee and you worked up your way right up to that plant manager and all of that. And that authoritative style, which still exists in some organizations like government, armed forces and all that, where the more senior person by default is supposed to have more knowledge, supposed to have more experience. And that worked. That worked in that era. And I think most of us young, dynamic, as Rajinder pointed out, are from that era. We have learned under that style of leadership. Now, when the knowledge revolution started coming in, when IT started becoming the driver, banks started transforming into technology, industry started implementing SAP, information became the driver in the value chain. Suddenly that information was available. So you didn't require it from that 20, 40 years experienced person. That information was available. I mean, part of that was available, not all of it, of course, but part of it. And then you suddenly needed a different kind of leaders. You needed a coaching kind of, let's take the example of the IT revolution when, let's say, these companies like Infosys, Wipro, and so many of them, Satyam, were being spawned. Now, the founders of Infosys probably did their engineering a couple of decades ago, where the actual mechanics of engineering was basically valves and tubes. And I don't even know whether computer engineering had any semblance to the kind of work that they were supposed to be doing now. But they were like coaching leaders, like my favorite example of Ramakant Achrekar, most of you will know him as the coach of the master world-class batsman. And ironically, Ramakant Acharikar in his entire career has played only one first-class cricket match between SBI and Hyderabad, I think. But he went on to be able to create many, of course, Sachin being the most famous of them all. So this coaching leader had the ability to get leaders, to get his subordinates to work together and guide them towards, so he or she would be aware, but not necessarily deeply proficient in the art themselves. But the world of tomorrow, I think, where we are headed, and especially with the world becoming so, I mean, our world is, it's going upside down, literally. I'll tell you why. I was giving this example to somebody the other day. A company that you had not heard of, most of you had not, I had not heard of it. A company called Zoom, on which we are right now, is today worth more than IBM. IBM is a 100-year-old company. It took, I don't know what all for it to reach where it reached. And a company called Zoom. By the way, Zoom is not the only, I mean, you have Skype, you have Cisco, you have WebEx. All of these were there well before Zoom, but suddenly Zoom comes in from behind. And in a matter of just 6 months during this COVID period, and similarly, another company called WeWork, which was the darling of the, at one point valued at 40 billion, then fell to 10 billion. As soon as COVID started, it has now dropped to a valuation of less than 2 billion. Now, in this kind of a world, in this volatile world, an authoritarian leader who comes with knowledge of the past will actually may actually be a disadvantage. Leaders of the future need to actually learn how to lead without authority. Because as we all know, good, talented people very regularly fire their bosses. They can fire their boss simply by quitting the job and going somewhere else. It may not happen right now because of the circumstances, may not happen for the next maybe 4, 5, 6 quarters, but eventually authoritative leadership is not really going to work very much in the future. And the good example, if you want to be sort of reaffirmed to that, is to just look at your own teenage kids. And look at the way you lead those kids vis-a-vis the way we were led by our parents. So very clearly, the leadership style is shifting. And in this shifting style, a leader's principal responsibility is going to be to create an environment of psychological safety. Now, I'll explain what that means. And I actually wrote a piece on it. I'll ask Rajendra to perhaps share it with you. It came out in the HT a couple of weeks ago. If an organization is going through a crisis, as we are right now, the leaders require 3 things to be able to pull that unit out of crisis. I have been in several crises in my life. That's the world that I lived in for almost 4 decades. And I can vouch for the fact that if you want to pull a team or an organization out of a crisis, these 3 are fundamental essentials. The first is that the leader needs to make a good plan. The only way the leader can make a good plan is if he's got or she's got good situational awareness, which means what is really happening on ground. What is really happening on ground, only the junior-most people will know, and they will never ever tell the truth unless they feel psychologically safe. Unless they feel that I'm in a safe environment, they will not tell that. So if the leader does not get an accurate picture of what is happening on ground, the planning is of no use. You really cannot plan. The second is when you're making the plan, the leader needs maximum participation from the team with the overall objective. Then again, the employees have to be psychologically safe, because if they are not safe, they will look at parochial interest. They'll say, "Mera division band to nahi ho jayega, iska naukari to nahi nikal jayega, IT outsource to nahi ho." They'll look at it from a very, very parochial view and not from an organizational perspective. And finally, in a time of a crisis, when situation is extremely fluid, you need a lot of empowerment at the downward level, at the forward level, because there is no time for the person to ask and get the orders and come back. There is no SOP because this is a completely new situation. So you have to act fundamentally following a general North Star with the core value system of the organization, but taking decisions which may be required to be taken, for which you may not get the time to get sanction from a superior. That again will only happen in those organizations where employees feel psychologically safe. If they feel, if the organization has a culture of hope for success vis-a-vis fear of failure. Most organizations, though they keep talking about, I've served with several of them, I've consulted with a lot of them, and many of them, when they say that we want to empower our people, the statement they make is we 100% empowerment, but 100% verification. But that's not empowerment. So I think to create that environment, a leader has to be a very different style of a leader And that leader needs to take the help of narratives to build the culture and to build the plan, rebuild the morale, and actually to execute the entire plan. Now, the reason why that is important, I want to use an example of a company which is very, very clearly ahead of its times. And I think Apple, we all agree, the ability, and one very simple benchmark is to just look at the ROI. Look at the ROI of the company and you'll know that this company is way ahead of its time. Now, this company is not about features. Its products are not about features, because if you look at it from a technology company point of view, you would say, yeah, it makes computers, it makes laptops, it makes iPads, and it makes phones. Yeah, so does Samsung, so does Lenovo, so do several other companies. But actually, if you look at Apple, you'll realize that it is a fusion of narratives. Steve Jobs himself was passionate about calligraphy. He learned that when he was in Harvard, and he was fascinated by it. And that's why you see the presence of beautiful fonts, beauty being a very key issue. He was himself a practicing Zen Buddhist, and that is why you see the simplicity of design. There's just one button. It's a black box. You can't open it. You can't do anything with it. It's very, very simple design. He brought in the whole element of packaging and retailing from companies like Burberry, and he brought in very senior leaders from there. And if you ever see the unveiling of an Apple product, it's like in a grand theater with sound systems all around. The opening of the envelope is pre-recorded and played in a Dolby Atmos. This is not a product launch. This is storytelling. This is theater. He's immersing you in an experience, and you're buying an experience. And that is why the adjective used for an Apple product is beautiful. It is not gigabytes capacity. It is not pixels. It's not speed. It's not transfer of data. None of that. It is beautiful. So Samsung can't compete against beautiful. They can compete against bus speeds, against pixels, against camera, screen size. But how do you compete against beautiful? Now, in a world where every product is going to be commoditized, which it will, you're in banking, you create a product, it's immediately copied by your competitor. As a matter of fact, copied. It is built by the competitor the same very day or the same week. Pretty much everywhere, it's going to be experience-driven rather than feature-driven. And experience only comes with stories. It doesn't come with features. And I'll explain to you why. I'll prove it to you why. So, why storytelling is such a powerful leadership tool? And this is a true survey which was done. The lady on the left, you recognize left of your screen, you all know, is J.K. Rowling, and she's the author of Harry Potter, best-selling author. And the one on the right has been the longest reigning monarch in the history of monarchs. And when people were asked, whom will you trust more as your leader? Trust more as your leader. Remember, that's the key phrase. There was no doubt in the overwhelming majority who thought that a great storyteller would make a great leader. By the way, Plato said this about 500 years ago. He said that those who tell stories will rule the world. And in a way, it's happening. So, some of the reasons why storytelling becomes an extremely important tool in the arsenal of a leader. First is that it teaches what you want to propagate in a memorable way. So most of us would have studied Archimedes' principle. Those engineers sitting over here would have studied twice because you studied it in school and again studied it. But if you were asked to explain the Archimedes' principle to somebody, let's say we were in a live hall, and I invited you to the stage and said, can you explain the Archimedes principle? I think many of us would struggle. Some of you might be Googling it right now. But if I just put that story, which you might have heard from your mother in a mother's lap about that crow, or maybe heard it in Panchtantra or one of those parables. This parable, by the way, is there in every culture, which is a very important aspect of story, because it tells you that some form of that story will be present in every culture, and there is a reason for that. I'll come back to that slide, I'll come back to that story in the next one. But the moment you see this image, you know, okay, this dropping of the stones into that is the Archimedes principle. When you put in stone, the buoyancy creates the water to come up. That is the Archimedes principle. But you forgot the Archimedes principle that you learned in school and in college. And yet remember something that you learned as a kid when you were in maybe not even going to school. That is the power of storytelling. Stories also create a shared reality. So I'll tell you the importance of story. Human beings cannot live without a story. It's not that you want a story, you cannot live without a story. For example, if you look up at the sky and somebody asks you, show me the Saptarishi, 7 rishis, or the Orion or the Great Bear, there is no bloody Great Bear there. There are only some dots. But it is the storytelling capability of that human which has made these dots, when they connect together, they become. And this is there in every culture. There is an Orion belt somewhere. There is a Saptarishi in another continent, another culture, which have completely evolved without knowing each other. They have taken dots in the sky and created a narrative around it. So human beings cannot exist without a story. If you have to inspire troops, you have to tell them stories. You cannot tell them features of the company. You can't tell them features of their product. They need statistics. Don't inspire, stories do. And that is the reason why all leaders who want to create a shared reality means the entire organization has one singular belief. And that singular belief, it has to be transmitted. It can't be done on memos. You can't say, okay, read that memo and sign it, that these are our core values. You have to propagate those stories. I'll give you a very simpler example. In every family, think about it this way. In every community, there are some stories. So let's say you are an Indian and you go abroad and you meet another Indian there. There is some story that you can tell which will make you a unique part of the group, because nobody else will understand that. Nobody else will understand the context of that. Now you come to a community which is, say, one particular community. In that community, you come down narrower and narrower, come down to a family. There will be jokes which only your family members can understand. Nobody else will understand, about some uncle who does something when he gets drunk or something. Matter of fact, if a young woman gets married into that family, it's only after she learns the family stories that she becomes really part of the family. She may be married technically, but she still doesn't know what are the narratives, what are the backstories happening. That is the importance of stories, to create a shared reality. Matter of fact, every culture has used storytelling as a means not only to make their group cohesive, but also to make that group insular from the others. How to stand apart from the other, because this is our story, this is our background, this is our pure blood. We come from the Aryans. So there is a whole narrative that is built to make people perform as a team, and the glue that holds that team together is actually nothing but stories. Stories also explain the why, and this is a very, very important lesson that I think we all need to learn. Now, most of you might recognize this picture of a character from Mahabharata, and the moment I give you that hint, you would jump and say, yeah, this is Shakuni, especially with this, devious looking. Now, Shakuni, if you ask anybody who has even and for those of my friends here who are logging in from overseas who may not have had the background of Mahabharata, but Mahabharata is one of the epics of India, in which Shakuni, this man here, is portrayed as the main villain. He's the main devious person who causes this entire, war to take place. Now, he's the villain in that one of the villains, the main sort of protagonist who makes other people fight and all of that stuff, and therefore more devious, because he himself is not putting himself in danger, but making other people fight and all of that. Now, it would be interesting to take a poll right now, if there's a live session I've done, and how many of you know the backstory of Shakuni? How many of you know what is Shakuni's story? So I know we are running short of time, so I'll tell you a short version. You should Google it up and look at the longer. It doesn't really matter whether it's accurate or not. I just want to illustrate this as a point of teaching. So Shakuni is the son of the king of Afghanistan, whose name is Sambala. And the king of Afghanistan's sister is Gandhari. She's from Kandhar. That's why she's called Kandhari. And Dhritarashtra, who is a blind king and an important king, he wants to marry the most beautiful woman in the world. And he approaches Sambala and he refuses. Sambala refuses the... one second. All right. So I just got a message in from the administrators, so it pops up. Where was I? Yeah, so the Dhritarashtra wants to marry Gandhari. He sends a proposal. Shambhala refuses. He says that I don't want my sister, the most beautiful woman in the world, getting married to a blind man, an impotent man. I'm not going to do that. Long story short version, Dhritarashtra sends Bhishma. They conquer Afghanistan, capture the entire clan. Shambhala is supposed to have 100 sons as well, brings all of them into prison. Gandhari is married to Dhritarashtra, and well, the nuances to the story. But essentially what happens is that the entire clan is imprisoned, and there's basically what happens is Gandhari is equivalent of a Mangalik, like we have Mangaliks in India, who are supposed to be born under inauspicious stars. So what happens is that you normally get that girl married to a tree and then married to a human, so that if anything were to be befalling the husband, it would be the tree and not the human. This is, I mean, in Afghanistan, they get them married to a goat. Now, Dhritarashtra discovers that Gandhari has been married to a goat before she was married to him. And so therefore, he is actually married a widower because they slaughtered the goat after marrying. So in that anger, he sentences, he believes that Shambhala deceived him. So he sentences the entire family to death, and a very cruel death, death by slow starvation. Slow starvation means every day they will get one mouthful of food so that their agony of starvation is prolonged. He was a pretty cruel guy. So what happens is that Shambhala in the dungeons realizes that their entire clan is going to die, and he decides that one of us needs to survive to take vengeance. And they decide to nominate somebody, and Shambhala puts a competition to figure out who that would be. And they obviously know that it has to be the most intelligent person, because the strongest person didn't make any difference. Shambhala is obviously the strongest amongst all of them, but he was defeated by Bhishma. So strength is not going to help here. What's going to help is intelligence, deviousness, cunning, whatever you want to call it. And so he sets a task for everyone to determine who that is going to be. And the task is to thread a thread through a grain of rice. So you have to put a thread through a grain of rice, because after all, the test actually is something that they can do in the dungeons, with the material that is available. And Shakuni does it. And we'll come back to how he does it in the end of this story. By this time, Gandhari manages to convince Dhritarashtra at least spare one male, descendant of my family, so that the clan can continue. And Dhritarashtra sort of says, okay, fine, I'll spare this young boy. By this time, what is happening is, because in the dungeon, it's been decided that Shakuni is the one who's going to survive. Everyone takes their one nivala of food and gives it to Shakuni every day. So each one of them is starving. So you have to visualize this kid's plight, who sees his brothers, his sisters, everybody dying one by one of starvation while they are keeping him alive. So the story goes that the last night they are going to spend in the dungeon, only Shambhala and Shakuni are left alive. And Dhritarashtra has been convinced by Gandhari that you spare Shakuni, at least one person, and Shakuni is next day going to be sent as the prince of Kandhar. So the father in the last night with his son tells him that, you're a small boy, and once you go to Kandhar and you become the prince and the king there, you're going to forget. You're going to forget all this. You'll forget this pain that we went through. This will become a distant nightmare for you. The boy says, no, I'm going to, take vengeance and all of that stuff, and I will keep true to my promise. And the father says, no, you're not going to do that, because you're a kid. You may say so now, but you will not do that. So I have to do something to you, which will remind you of your purpose, purpose of vengeance, every step that you take in your life. And it is the father who puts the son on that concrete, sort of bed, and breaks his legs in the dungeons, breaks his legs and his hands, and actually cripples his own son, so that his son will have no distraction in his life apart from this one single vengeance mission for which he's been programmed and kept alive. Now we come back to how Shakuni put that thread through the grain of rice. He basically takes the grain of rice and plugs an ant hole through which ants enter in. And the ants bore a hole through that grain of rice. So Shakuni, ironically, has got nothing against the Pandavas. He has no issue with the Pandavas. He is basically using the Pandavas to bore a hole through the Kauravas, exactly as he managed to bore a hole through the grain of rice. Now that you know the backstory, and of course, this is the version, there may be any other versions. I'm just using, this is not a historical story, so don't get after me. This is not the true story and all of that. I'm just using it as a template to illustrate that when you hear the backstory of the biggest villain whom you have thought of as a villain from your childhood till now, in 10 minutes time, you suddenly have a thought of, hell, if I was in his place, I would have probably done the same or maybe worse. Imagine the power of backstories. In an organization, what are we trying to do? We are trying to create teams, right? How can you create a team amongst people who know each other's CV stories? You only know each other's CV stories. I was vice president here, I did this, I passed out of IIM, I did that, I sold so many units, I was promoted as APAC head and all of this. your CV story, it's your resume story. It's a story that you tell people. Most of it's embellished. The real story is how you were cheated, how you were betrayed, how you were lied to, how you lied to people, how cheated, how you betrayed people. That's your real story. And that real story is known only to your closest friends. But you don't have to wait for 15, 20 years for camaraderie to build up in a team. You can make camaraderie happen like that in one night fireside chat with the right ambience and the right amount of spirits. You can, spirits in both sense, you can actually forge that team together into a brotherhood by simply making sure that everybody else knows each other's backstories. And that's the power of storytelling. So the last reason why I think storytelling is the most important tool, and I want you to really go into a little bit of introspective thinking right now. I want you to visualize some trek that you went for, some marathon that you did, some ordeal that you went through, really, really bad ordeal. Like I'm a marathon runner. I used to run at least, and used to go for trekking, checking, and all that. I'm sure. And I mean, you choose that ordeal. The time you were doing that ordeal, while you were running, while you were doing that trek, while you were delivering that baby, whatever, that time of that ordeal was horrible. It was horrible. But when you think back about that day of that, buddy, I ran the Mumbai marathon. I did this, I did that. I went on that trek to Kailash Mansarovar. I did that. I climbed it. I went to Khardungla and came back. When you think about that day, it's an amazing day. Now, my fundamental question to you is this. When you write the history of your life, when you put the diary of your life, I'm just saying it notionally, will you put that day as a good day or a bad day? Because on that day, you went through a very bad experience. But when you think about that experience with a story, it was a great day. So what day was it? Storytelling is actually mind hacking. You can get inside the mind of somebody and make that person alter their mind shift at the way they look at things. That's the power of storytelling. So I just wanted to stress this because I very often hear people come up to me and say, I have this speech to make. Can you help me with this speech? And I have this PowerPoint slide. I've contacted this company, which is supposed to be excellent in templates and design and all, and they've charged me like $5,000 for this template, so it must be good. And that's why I don't understand why the audience goes to sleep. It's got nothing to do with the tools. It's got everything to do with the art of creating an architecture of a story, which I'll talk about in a while. And I'll explain to you why that architecture, which is one of many architectures, by the way, so there are dozens of architectures. I'm going to discuss just one today. That architecture is required for you to be able to create a compelling narrative and to tell it. So we'll talk about that. Now, I want to take this example. This is an example that I take very often. And the reason why I use this example is, of course, it's an internationally known example. If I was doing this for a smaller, say, audience, I would probably choose a closer group example. But let's take this example of The Lion King, which was one of the seminal movies that was made for several reasons. Because firstly, of course, it grossed 6 billion plus at that point of time, almost 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And a remake has been made recently. I'm talking about the original film. But more importantly, this was the first film, which was a cartoon film, animation film, which was also meant for adults. Most of you must have seen the movie. Those with kids, if you haven't seen the movie, you should see the movie. It's a great movie, but you should see it anyways. So for those who have not seen it, I'll tell you the story. The story is pretty simple, and those of you who've seen the movie will go along with me. So it begins in a happy setting in a place called Pride Lands, where there is this king called Mufasa, who is suddenly, the movie begins with Simba, the hero, being born, and the Simba's childhood, happy state of a bliss, living happily with the friends, playing around, this, that, every day is fun and all of that. But of course, like in any story, there is a villain, and here is a villain who is planning to usurp the status quo, and he wants to become the king by killing the king, Mufasa. So he wants to kill him, and he also wants to kill his son so that there is no lineage problem later on. And he's planning and plotting and planning. But of course, now what he does is he engineers a plan, and in that plan, he kills the hero's father, and he also convinces the hero that you have to go on exile because your father actually plans to kill the son, but and he sends him away to another world, another land. And Simba escapes. Simba doesn't die, he escapes. And after some struggles, he almost dies of dehydration and tired, this, that, but he meets a couple of friends, Pumbaa, Timo, and all of that, and he has now settled into his new life, and he's happy, and he forgets his past. But his past comes back to him. His past comes back to him. He's reminded of his past. He's reminded of his responsibility. In one of the scenes in the movie, you might remember, it's his father's ghost which comes and tells him that your uncle killed me. That's how I died. That's what happened. First, the hero is reluctant. He refuses his call and he says, no, I don't want to go back and all of that. But then he's convinced to go back to the Pride Lands. And this time he faces his nemesis over there, fights his demons, and he defeats them, and he reclaims the throne. So this is the story. And as I told you, in storytelling, there are multiple architectures. This is one of the architectures. This is called the hero's journey. This architecture is called the hero's journey. And very often after watching this movie or listening to the story of Lion King, I ask people that, have you read the story before somewhere? People say, no, I've not read the Lion King. I have watched the movie, but I have not read the Lion King. I said, have you read the story? No, I don't think so. You've not only read this story, ladies and gentlemen, you have studied it. It was called Hamlet. And this story, Hamlet, exactly the same thing. Prince of Denmark, father is killed, he's exiled, father comes as a ghost, tells him, he comes back, kills his uncle. So much so that actually in the discussion of Lion King, if you go to their website and all, they actually tell you it's a frame by frame adaptation of Hamlet. And of course, I put a Hindi movie also. There are several plays and all of that who have basically taken the same narrative, exactly the same narrative, and recreated it because the architecture is the same. Now they just changed a few characters and you thought it was a completely different story. So the reason why this architecture works. So architectures are not in the story. They are in our head. They're framed in our head. So if you plug into that architecture of what is already in the head of that person to whom you're telling the story, your story becomes exponentially powerful. So it actually has effect over there. Now, if you look at the narrative, this particular, I'll just touch upon it very, very briefly because we don't have the time to go into the depth of it. But this architecture, the hero's journey, it begins with there being a hero. Obviously, if there is a hero, there has to be a protagonist, there has to be an antagonist. And that antagonist, at this stage, you introduce the protagonist and the antagonist, and you have this world where everything is okay, everything is fine. It is at this strata, the world is at this strata. And then there is another world. We'll come to that. But what happens is that the first clash happens between the hero and the villain, between the protagonist and the antagonist. And the first clash, the hero has to lose, because if the hero wins there, the movie ends there. So, or the story ends there. So hero has to lose. The heroine has to lose, and she has to go away into another land. Ram has to go to Banbas. Luke Skywalker has to go to another planet. Every hero has to go into exile. And in that exile, that hero has to go through, when I'm saying hero, I'm just using it gender neutral. So for lack of, I don't want to keep saying hero, heroine. So the heroine goes to the exile, and there she meets her mentors. She meets people who give them a whack on the right side of the head. They shake them out of their complacency or whatever. And then they come back. And this time when they come, and they come back transformed. And when they come back, and this time they have a clash with the villain, they win. This is the fundamental architecture. The architecture of Ramayana, architecture of Star Wars, architecture of close to about 40 to 50% of stories that you would have seen, heard, or watched in movies. It's one of the most popular architectures. That's why I used it for this session. But like I said, this is just one of several architectures. And like any other element, architectures are required for different situations. So if you're doing a short talk, perhaps this is not going to work. If you're doing a big saga, so we have to look at which horse for which course. But I just wanted to introduce one architecture to you. Why do we love these architectures? Why do we love these architectures? And to answer that story, I want to show you something else. I want to show you the picture of two Hollywood actors. You should try and recognize them. Some of you might have recognized them. If you don't recognize them, please ask your kids. They will tell you who they are. The one on the left is Tobey Maguire. He acts as Spider-Man. And the one on the right is Henry Cavill. And he acts as Superman. So these are the two heroes. Now, based on the CV, based on the resume, who do you think is a better superhero? If you were doing hiring for superheroes, whom would you hire? Without a doubt, Superman. Because Superman can fly, he can go into other planets, he can lift up trains, he can even see through clothes. Spider-Man, on the other hand, can basically swing between one place to the other, and he falls, whatever. He's a mere mortal who's got some power. But this Superman is immortal. He comes from another planet. He's like, wow. Who do you think does better in the box office? You find that film for film, Spider-Man is loved, watched, return of interest is twice of Superman. Why does that happen? Because technically speaking, Superman should be super and should be the one who's getting the entire market share. Why is it that a weakling, we know it, that if you ask a kid, ask a 7 or 8-year-old kid, that if Superman and Spider-Man fight, who will win? And everyone will tell you, yeah, then Superman will win. Superman will take and twist Spider-Man into pieces. But why is it that Spider-Man is our hero and not Superman, or more loved hero and not that? Because this architecture is our architecture. This architecture is in our head. This architecture is, I am in this world right now and things are okay. And suddenly I have this very problem. I have this boss. I have this bully. I have this bad relationship. I have this toxic thing. I had this failure in business. I had aspirations and dreams and they aren't working and I have failed there. And someday I'll go away. I'll go for a vacation for 10 days. I'll go to another place. And in that place, I will learn these skills. I'll put my mind together. I'll think it through. I'll get the clarity in my head and I'll come back and I'll face my nemesis and I'll defeat him and this time I'll win. By the way, this is one of the main reasons why organizations do off-sites. The reason why you do off-site is you take the people away from this world into another world. And in that world, you teach them and bring them back. And when they come back into this world, they would now get the lessons from that world. By the way, this is very similar to what's happening right now. We have like about what, 45 minutes into the session, and you basically went into another world, those of you are still here, into another world and came back with the realization, yeah, this scene makes sense. It's true, yeah, Mahabharata, Ramayana ki bhi story same hai, iski bhi. You are getting that realization in your head. It's exactly the way this architecture works in real life. And I'm taking a very quick example of when architectures are not adhered to, what happens. This is one of my favorite examples. This was a movie called LOC. Some of you may have seen it. Not many of you would have seen it because it bombed. Which was ironic because this movie was released 2 years after Kargil happened. Kargil, people were in their fervor of patriotism and all of that, and Bharat Mata Ki Jai, all of that stuff. The ensemble of heroes they had, an equal number of heroines. I mean, look at the number of heroes that were there in this movie. I have another slide on heroines. I don't, there are too many. Just, do you see this person on the left, bottom corner? His name is Nagarjuna. Those of you who don't know him, he is one of the leading stars in Telugu movies in Andhra Pradesh. He's like Amitabh Bachchan, Dharmendra type, he's at that level. His entire role, after being shot, after being put in the movie, was taken out because the movie became so long that they could not accommodate all the heroes and heroines who were there in the movie, and yet the movie bombed. The movie bombed. It was a disaster. You can't say JP Datta does not know how to make war movies because he made Border. Border was a super hit. Why did the movie bomb? Again, that failure of the architecture. If you think back, those of you who seen the movie and you think back, why did it bomb? Why did it bomb? Why did it bomb? You'll remember there was no villain. There was no Gabbar Singh. There was no Mogambo. In the climax of this film, all these heroes, they managed to reach the peak of Kargil. And who do they find over there? Some security guard looking guys, with ponchos and, sloppy guys there. And, they beat them up. And the audience goes, "Arey, inko marne ke liye to ye Saif Ali Khan akela khati tha. Why the hell did you have to take all these guys with you?" We need a great villain in a great story. Unless there is a very big dragon to slay, you cannot rally your troops. You can't rally your troops to say, "Yaar, agle saal hum 5% aur apna top line badhayenge." There's no rallying required. But you want to say, "I want to triple the top line in the next 2 years." Then there is a dragon to be slayed, and then heroes are required. So I just wanted to illustrate the power of an architecture and the importance of having architecture before you base your story. A lot of people say, I have a story in my mind and I want to tell it. That's a bit like saying I've got rice in my house and I want to make biryani. It's not going to work. You have to have a process of taking that ingredients and putting it in the right combination. As I gave you an example, that even if one ingredient is missing, your entire story will collapse and it will sound only exciting to you, not to anybody else. We come to the second part of telling. I'm not going to get into details, too much of details here, for the simple reason that this is much more of an experiential issue. This can't be, it's like the theory of riding versus the actual riding. You can teach the theory of riding. You can say what kind of clothes you have to wear, there's that, what of that. But riding, actually, I've just used that metaphor because I want to tell you a very interesting metaphor. So there is a world famous magician, by the way, whose name is Juan Tamariz. He's a Spanish magician who's written several books on the art of creating miracles, which is basically what happens when you go into a movie hall. You get into that hall and you start watching and you start believing, you start crying, knowing fully well that what is happening over here is just being played on the silver screen. The heroes aren't dying, all of that, still crying. So he says to be able to create magic in your stories, to create engagement in your stories, there have to be two elements that you have to be completely aware of. The spectator's mind, the listener's mind, is being driven by two horses. You see these two horses here. They're known as the two horses of Juan Tamariz. One horse is very, very rational, very, very logical, very, very suspicious, very, very looking at, what is happening, you told me this, you told me that, but I have to look at this. No, Shakuni, that is not the story. I just checked Wikipedia. It's not the story. That's not the story. It's slightly different here. This, that. This is a very, very logical, rational, fact-examining horse. The other horse is a Pegasus. It wants to fly. It wants to go into that, it wants to escape into the miracle or whatever. Your job as a storyteller is to make sure the Pegasus is the horse that is leading your listener's mind, not the rational. Rationality never convinces anybody to do anything extraordinary. If you tell somebody rationally you should climb up to Kargil and you will become Amar and you will get a Paramveer Chakra, go rationally thinking कि boss ऐसा है कि I joined the army for a profession, नौकरी के लिए. ठीक है, मैं मर जाऊंगा तो उसके बाद whether you give me Paramveer or any other Chakra, what is it going to do to me? It's not going to do it. I'm dead. How does it help me? I'd rather stay alive and But the emotional mind, glory of the nation, I will go down in history, people will take my name, there'll be roads named after me. That's the emotional pull. So when we are telling stories, we have to constantly ensure that the logical horse is not the one that is taking the lead. It is the emotional horse which is going ahead, because emotions are what you touch with story. Emotions are what you lead with. You don't lead with, no officer leads with the stars on his shoulder. They, buddy, look, I have 3 stars, I am a captain. Nobody leads like that. They lead with an emotion, they lead with an aura, they lead with charisma. And charisma, aura, all of these are the forte of the Pegasus horse, not the logical horse. The logical horse doesn't even know the definition of charisma. So I want to now tell you a story of a leader who went through this journey, which I'm talking about. You can Google her up. Her name is Radhika Gupta. She's a CEO in one of the Edelweiss Group companies. And she was no stranger to public speaking. I want to tell you that. That's a very important thing for us to realize, that she was no stranger to public speaking, because if you actually Googled her, you would find that she has done several talks. She has appeared in various different platforms. She has appeared in CNBC. She's appeared in TV. She's done many talks. And as you can see, her talks have got, about 1,000 views, another 2,000 views, or whatever, 900 views, 100 views, and all of that. She did one story called The Girl with the Broken Neck. One story. This is her story, not CEO Edelweiss, not anybody funne come from Wharton, or The Girl with the Broken Neck. That's the story she did. And see what happened. That went on to get more views, 10 times more views than all her talks put together. It created a brand for her. She went on to do more talks after that. She's not now advising on. It's actually ironical. If you look at this very slide, you see that she has spoken as a CEO Edelweiss, and there she has got maybe about 2,000 talks. But when she's spoken as The Girl with the Broken Neck, more than 150,000 people resonated with her. Another talk that she did, successful business lesson that your mom can teach you. Not what you learn from Wharton, not what I learned from working with McKinsey, what your mom can teach you. And again, you see the resonance that is happening over there. This is the power of storytelling by a leader. By the way, this is not just to get more views. This is to get more business. Take a look at these 2 slides, read it yourself, and you will understand the power of storytelling. In the left slide, there is a person who listened to her talk and promises that he's going to make investment in her company. Though in her talk, please go and listen to that talk. In her talk, she talks nothing about investment. Nothing. It's got nothing to do with investment. On the right-hand side is a father who's wanting his daughter to be role model by a leader like her. That is the power of storytelling. You will never ever get a message like the one you see on the right, of father saying, I saw your PPT with my daughter and now I want my daughter to learn PPT from you. Not going to happen. So that, to my mind, is the power of storytelling. We have been doing, as I told you earlier, Rajendra also mentioned that we have been doing this project in a kind of a closed group till now. Interestingly, I just wanted to end it. If you go and search for Radhika Gupta now in Wikipedia, the line that defines her in Wikipedia is she is also known as the girl with the broken leg. That has become something that she thought was a disability has now become the greatest brand strength that she has got. Not a unique story. There are several other people. The first person you see over here, Brigadier Raveen Chopra, a man who has survived 7 times. He survived death, and nobody knew his story. The moment he told his story, the number of people who actually, the most powerful testimonial he gave me was that now my son-in-law looks at me in a very different way. Imagine the power of that story. Many other examples. There's another one, Pooja Thakur, great speaker, Air Force officer who was the guard of honor with Obama when Obama came to India. Listen to some of these stories. Slumboy Millionaire. These are all created with the same architecture in the same project that we were talking about. So in the end, I want to talk to you about this project that Rajendra and I were working on for several months now. And I think we are now at a stage where it's fairly mature. This is a 5-stage process. We called it Project Katha for lack of a better word. I think it's a good word, good title. This basically it goes through a 5-stage process. In the first stage, we do a basic understanding of the architectures, not just one architecture, but architectures that are available. Like any management student knows, all of us know that you have different models, mental models. So you have 5 forces, you have SWOT analysis, you have various different mental models, first principle thinking. These have application in different situations. And basically a wiser leader is somebody who has an assortment of such models in their head and can quickly identify that for this particular situation, what is the model I need to use. So this one basically talks about, the first module talks about the different architectures. We'll learn about 4 or 5 different powerful architectures, and we'll also learn the architecture of telling. What is the architecture of telling? How do you tell? How do you engage people? How do you make people forget that they've been listening to the same person for almost 55 minutes now? How do you make that happen in terms of using a voice, what is the construct of telling? In the second module, we intend to actually work with a group, and I'll tell you the reason why. When movies are being made, when scripts are being written, when book authors are writing, they have what is called a writer's group. The writer's group, the movie director's group, they meet, and they meet in a offsite. They meet somewhere else where the story is discussed between writers. They're discussing the stories and they're pointing out nuances. They're listening to it from an audience perspective and they're refining it. So in the second stage, we are going to create a very small batch of closed group. It's a very close group where we'll have maybe, I don't know, about 20 odd people, 20, 30 people who will be participating in this story learning or storytelling group, where each one will craft their own story. You'll craft your own story. That story will be based on these architectures and based on the principles of telling. It'll be based on, I urge you to go back and take a look at Radhika Gupta's story, and you will understand the architecture, how you use your, so I'll tell you the rationale behind it. I'll tell you the rationale. So a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. Very good thing. It's a good thing to have, by the way. It's a gift of fear. Matter of fact, I always tell people, many people ask me, you've done so many sessions, don't you feel afraid? And I say, of course I feel afraid. I feel a light sense of apprehension when I go onto stage, because if I don't feel that, there can only be 2 reasons. First reason is I give a jack shit about my audience. I didn't give a damn. I care a flying fish whether they like me, don't like me, or whatever. The second is I have to be clinically insane, because if you are in this phase and you're not feeling apprehensive, then there is something fundamentally wrong with your psyche. So everyone is afraid. But how you conquer that fear, not conquer, but how you manage that fear is what you learn when you start going through this process of creating a story. And one of the easiest ways to do that. So one of the biggest fears most speakers have is when I go in front of the audience and start speaking over there, There will be people in the audience who know this better than me. They know this subject better than me. I may come out as ignorant, and that is a fear. And that fear very clearly transmits to the audience. If you're afraid, the audience will smell it like that. Involuntarily, they'll smell it. Or similarly, as you smell, if the audience is hostile to you, you'll smell it involuntarily. Now, what happens is that if you were to open your talk with something that is extremely personal to you. Suppose I asked you to describe the first school journey you took in a school bus. Nobody is an authority on that better than you. If somebody asked you how you felt emotionally when you broke your neck, nobody is a better, no one sitting in the audience who can say, I know how, not possible. So you lead with telling your personal story, and that ensures that when you lead, you are the authority on that subject as you are leading. So we'll discuss several such techniques to fine-tune your journey into actual speaking. And then we go into stage 4, where we have a concept of practicing or getting your 10,000 hours of practice. 10,000 hours, by the way, is a myth. You don't need 10,000 hours. You need maybe about 40 hours to really be, not master anything, but to be about 80 to 90% good in anything. You need about 40, 50 hours, not more than that. And I've done it in several areas, so I know what I'm talking about. Of course, I'm not talking about becoming an Olympic athlete and all, but if you want to reach up to 70 to 80% of any master of the game, it's quite doable in a much shorter time frame than we have been led to believe. In this stage, that crafted story will be narrated in front of. So in module 3, the story is being curated, it's being critiqued, it's being handheld by me, by the various other members of the group who are, sort of critiquing each other, learning from each other. And then we launch this with a low-risk audience. A low-risk audience is basically universities, colleges, your own schools, wherever, where the audience is in awe of you anyway. So it's a low risk, but you're getting your hours of practice. And finally, we have a controlled platform like a TEDx or a Josh or any one of those platforms where we launch your girl with the broken neck story, your story that's launched. Your anchor talk, as it's called. All of us must have an anchor talk, one anchor talk. What is an anchor talk? An anchor talk is something, if you're woken up 1 o'clock at night and told you have to give a talk, you go there and you are able to do that. An anchor talk is something that is your story, personal to you. You've learned lessons. You are able to teach those lessons. We work on that anchor talk, and then we launch that anchor talk. Now, it's very important today, I believe, because your brand today, when people Google you, the first thing that will come is a YouTube video. It won't be your website. If you have a YouTube video out there on your name, that's the first thing that will come up. And you can't redo your first video. That's not possible. But once it's out there, and let's say it's suboptimal, then it's suboptimal. So whether it's a young student in his teens who is planning to go to college and get admission in some premier Ivy League college, who has on his CV, I've done a TEDx talk on climate change, which has got 500,000 views. Whether it's a person who's wanting to make a brand for himself, not just as a company CEO, but also as an individual who's got a brand out there, as known as a person, a thought leader, thinker, this, that. Whether you want to be invited into forums where you will be able to, whether you want to be visible. Today, visibility is the key. In so much of clutter, visibility is the key, and the person who is visible will be the person who will probably stand out and get the first right of refusal for pretty much anything that life has to offer. So this is a 5-stage process that we have designed. We have tested it. We have some amazing success stories that have happened. And I think it's something that would help us a lot because we've also evolved a methodology whereby this can be done online. And we'll get into the mechanics of that later for those of you who would be interested in it. I don't want to waste the time of everyone else who has attended this so far. For them, I thank them. I thank all of you. And once again, to do a very quick recap, we began this session with talking about the importance of storytelling and not confusing it with the public presentation, or I have to go to CII and make a presentation. It's not about that. It's about your ability to wrap anything that you are saying, to wrap it in a story so that it remains immemorable. It just sinks in. We talked about how storytelling is the essence of a leadership toolkit, whether it's to inspire people, whether it's to instill core values in them, whether it's to actually plant a seed of an idea inside their head, which makes them believe that it was their idea. We talked about why it is important to have architectures, why this entire fabric rests on an architecture, why this entire building is put on a steel frame, and what is that architecture. And as I've shared one of the architectures with you, as I mentioned, there are several architectures. This is a more popular one that is used in big films and all of that. Epics are made using this architecture. And then we talked about the concept of the two horses, the emotional horse and the logical horse, and how it is the job of every storyteller. The movie director you love so much, his job is to make your logical horse sit down. You sit down and let the Pegasus fly. And the Pegasus is the one who's, bloody hell, I'm like, I'll learn martial arts like Bruce Lee, and I'll do this, I'll do that. That surge of adrenaline that you get when you see the hero jumping out and beating up that guy, that surge of righteousness you feel when the villain is beaten in the end, this is all the Pegasus, because none of it is happening. The hero and the villain, they are both friends. You know that. This is all happening on a screen. The job of every storyteller is to take that horse and make it fly higher. And in the end, we discussed how those of you who are interested in this would want to participate in this journey. What is the plan? On the right-hand side of your screen, you see the details for this project. That's Rajendra's email ID. Those of you who are interested can contact him directly and WhatsApp him or whatever. On the left, you have my Twitter handle and my website, which is only to get introduced to me. For all the inquiries for this session, in case you're interested, the email and the phone number on the right would be the one that will help you. If there are any questions you want to ask me at this stage, I'll be more than happy to try and answer them. I don't know, when you're opening the chat, how do you want to do this?
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, we've already started getting some questions from the YouTube. So I would say, viewers, what you really need to do is be part and come join us and be part of this project, Katha. Email me at rajendra@owl.today, or just WhatsApp me at 98200073665. And Captain Raghu Raman himself, the master storyteller, will be leading these sessions and these modules. Module number 1 is slated to kickstart in the month of October itself. Do get in touch with me. In the meanwhile, we will go back to the young and dynamic Captain Raghu Raman once more. By the way, you know what? I was nervous today. My laptop was refused to boot and start up. And I was just completely fitting over. One of my colleagues came online. He said, "Why are you nervous today? Are you?" Because I said, one is, of course, I'm facing the master whom I have known for the last 15 years, but still my laptop refuses to, obey me. So that's the fun part. Captain, there's a question: how to bring humor in storytelling from real life story? This is Mohammed Rauf who's asked that.
Say that again. I didn't get the question. Why don't you just open up the chat so I can see the question? So it'll be
what the chats have been coming on YouTube, Captain. I mean, I get it on the on the WhatsApp. Yeah.
So can you just repeat that question?
How to bring humor in storytelling from real life stories? Mohammed Rauf is asking that question.
So see, that's why I'm saying it's very, very important to learn the architecture and learn the pieces that you have to work with. It's like playing chess. You have pieces. You have a bishop, you have a horse, you have all of these pieces. So suppose I took a story of a man who is going to do a online webinar that he's announced days in advance and all of that stuff, and it's about communication and all of that, and suddenly his laptop crashes in the last minute. Now his laptop is crashed, he's in a panic, and he's saying, I'm going to tell people, and my own laptop has crashed, and then the last minute somebody comes, puts it on, and just before the time was scheduled on, it comes online. There is humor there. The same story you heard like 30 seconds ago. You can take any narrative and you can shape it. What is humor, by the way? So that's what we learn in the workshop. Humor is not ha ha ha. That's not humor. Humor is creating tension and more tension and more tension and releasing it in an unexpected way. For example, let me take a example from today's session. I told you that story of the crow. Suppose I began telling you, there is this Archimedes principle, and this crow, you must have heard that story and all. But the next picture I put up there was a picture of a crow sitting on top of a tap and turning the tap and drinking water from the tap. I said, but crows have also become high-tech. They have also become like digital, something like that. There's humor there. It's how you create an expectation and twist the expectation in an unexpected way. What's a joke? At the end of the day, when you take any joke and you cut it into pieces, you see there is a build-up, there is a leading or rather a misleading towards a certain direction. And when the listener is going into that direction, suddenly you jerk him into this direction. Logical horse is leading, but you make the Pegasus go to another direction. That release is humor. So you have to learn the architecture. Once you learn the architecture, so okay, let's go back and answer it in a very fundamental way. First principles way. The difference between a chef and a cook. A cook can also make meals. A chef can also make meals. A cook makes meals based on recipes. He knows that for 5 people, if I have to make gajar ka halwa, I need so much of gajar, so much of chini, so much of shula, and he makes it. A chef knows the first principles of food. So now, in case of a cook, if a certain ingredient is missing, the cook is stopped. He does not know what to do. Gajar is not available. He cannot make halwa because gajar is not available. But a chef knows what other vegetable can be substituted, which will come closer to it, which flavor will go with what spice will go with this. So in this workshop, we learn the first principles of storytelling. And once you learn the first principles of storytelling, you would be able to say, okay, this is the point where I need to use humor. This is the point I need to use gravitas. This is the point where I need to create attention and then release it. You learn the art of leading the experience of the listener or the viewer. And I think that is more important than saying, how do I begin by telling? A lot of places you will read, and a lot of, lot of people also propagate, begin with humor, begin by telling a joke. How many times you have sat in some session where the speaker has come and told a flat joke and you have cringed, you have felt, for him, because he falls over it. The joke is yaad karke aaya hoga kahin se, likha hua hai, he narrates it, there's no context to it, there's nothing to it. He's a cook. He's got a recipe and he's floating that recipe. You know what a chef will do? Chef will come over there, he'll look around, he'll look at some of the things that are happening. He will even use the introduction that has been given, which he's not aware of, or he'll use the previous speaker's session and begin from there and start with that. I'll tell you one story, because a funny story. Many years ago, I was in a speaker lineup and I was the last one to go. And before me, there was another good speaker, a friend of mine also, Santosh Babu. Some of you might have heard him. He's a hypnotist, but he talks about his experience with training dogs, and he has a very nice sort of story there. So he was the second last speaker, and after that, the person introduced me and said that now we got a soldier who's going to talk about army and all of that. So I kind of started by saying, okay, now in terms of priority, I know where soldiers are in this country after the dogs. Now it just evoked a sense of laughter. This is not scripted. You can't script it. If you have a recipe, you will not be able to do it. For this, you have to be a chef. For this, you have to know first principles. You can say, okay, I can take this piece. I can take this piece. Santosh is a friend of mine. He will not mind it. I'll laugh it out and I'll talk to him also about it and all of that. And I'll change the ambience. That's the way to introduce humor. So don't go by these formulas. Don't go by, 3 minute ka joke hona chahiye, 6 minute ka. Don't do that. That's a recipe. And it will work maybe once in a while. And it will work when you're making only that one gajar ka halwa. It will not work any other time. Once you learn the first principle, how much cooking, what is the kind of stuff, what is saute, what is this, then you become a chef. I'm making all these terms, not that I know how to do anything more than boil an egg. Humor, see? So how you are able to play with it is something which you will understand once you learn the building blocks of it.
Oh, simply, awesome. So that's what I was saying is, by the way, viewers, we are already getting direct requests on my mobile number.
Let's go to the
Project Katha. I'll tell you the questions very nicely. Another question coming up for you, sir, is let us know something about your personal hobbies, which are very close to your heart. What is your hobby? What are you good at, really? Apart from
hobbies is not something that you necessarily have to be good at. Hobby is something that you do because you're passionate about it. I have a few hobbies which I have actually, I don't know. I think it's serendipity. It's not like I chose those hobbies so that they would develop into something which would be, sort of coalesce together. These were hobbies that happened at random. I was very, very passionate about reading from childhood. That helped me a lot because I read a lot of stories. I read a lot of, one of the best ways to become a writer or a storyteller is to read a lot of stories. I read a lot. So I, again, encourage everyone. All leaders have to, it's very cliche to say that leaders have to be leaders and all of that. And when I say readers, I don't mean by WhatsApp or online. Serious books. You have to read serious, thick books. You know, so much so, for me, reading is, I'll show you something. It was just something that happened to him. So this, for example, is a book that I've been reading for some time now. This is, by the way, the book written by, one of the books written by Joan Tamaris, which I spoke about. When I buy the book, I put a cover on it like a school cover, you know, while I'm reading it, because I don't want, so for me, this is like a pristine a source of knowledge. I have that bond with books. Of course, after I read it and all, it'll go back into that bookshelf there, where it'll get its original spine and all of that. So reading has been one of my hobbies, which I would urge everybody to try and do that. And reading books, not pamphlets, not synopsises, not business summaries. Business book summaries people read to show others that I have read. But if you really want to read, you have to go into that investment of the author who has put in like years to read that. So reading is one. Secondly, I've been always fascinated with magic ever since I was a child. And it might sound a little cliched and silly, but think about it. If a person is able to come to you and make you suspend your belief and make you believe in miracles, it's funny because children actually believe in miracles. Adults suspend their reality to believe in miracles. The old relive their childhood through those miracles. And the cynical, for a few minutes at least, are amazed with wonderment. All of that is possible in the art form. It's one of the oldest art forms, by the way. It predates dance, music, everything. And there's a lot to be learned from there in terms of psychology of spectators. What do spectators want? Where is the point of astonishment that should come? How should that happen? A lot of architecture which goes over there. That's another hobby. I like to ride motorcycles, and I tell my friends this is midlife crisis. So as a child, I used to be in a cycle. Now, when you are in midlife, all these guys, you know, all the motorcyclists, you know, most of them are midlife crisis guys. So jokes apart, it's a great way to travel. I love to travel, and when I say travel, it's not necessarily. I think there's so much of stuff in and around us to see. For example, I don't know how many people living here in Bombay know that just 400 kilometers from Bombay, there is a place called Lonar Lake. I'm going there next weekend. Lonar Lake is, by the way, the site where an asteroid struck planet Earth and an ice age was caused. That's over here, 400 kilometers away in Maharashtra. So we've got these incredible places to see. And I've always felt that traveling should be done by road, and preferably when you can smell the air. The reason why I believe that is because, let's say you're traveling from here to Goa. Not now, but whenever it opens up. What's going to happen? You're in Delhi, you'll go in a rush to the airport, but cab, traffic, then you'll go put your baggage in that, and then you'll again start. And there is this gitch, you're landing there, taking out your bag, then the taxi guys are holding you. And so your cadence at which your life runs, the metrotone at which your life runs, it's like tuck, 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 tuck. It continues in that. But when you travel by road, when you go on treks, when you go walking, when you are connected to the nature, when you smell what is the air of that region, when you travel, you get into Ratnagiri and you can smell the mangoes. You can smell mangoes 30 kilometers before you enter Ratnagiri. When you go to Himachal, you can smell the apples. That is something that will only come when you are traveling by road. And if you can, the best way to travel is by two-wheeler, because it's easier, it is simpler, and it doesn't have to. So a lot of these bikers think that you have to have a bike, Harley Davidson. You can take a no. I have met some of the most adventurous travelers on regular, 100cc motorcycles, 200cc motorcycles, traveling all the way with a rucksack tied to their back, traveling across nations on that. So it's a state of mind. So yeah, that is my third. I also am fond of dogs. I work in a few kennels, shelter, rescue kennels and all of that. And I have one at home. So these are 3-4 of my hobbies.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for articulating that. There's an interesting question from Guru Raj, who's a retail trainer. He's saying that sales does depend a lot on buyers too. Some go for story, some for the emotion, and some for the fabbing. I don't know, FAB thing. So stories might not always work is his question. Yeah, Guru Raj. Yeah.
There's a question or a statement?
It's a question or a statement. So he's
yeah,
asking, he's making a
movies
statement.
Don't work. Some movies don't work. Some novels don't work. Some poetry doesn't work. Some pictures don't work. So what do? We stop watching movies. We stop making movies. We stop. The movies that don't work were badly made movies. The sales pitches which had a fab are badly made sales pitches. As simple as that. There is no purchase that happens. No purchase, no decision you will take in your life which is not an emotional decision. You will take an emotional decision and you will rationalize it later. Man is not a rational animal. Man is a rationalizing animal. So you will take a decision based on emotion and then you will justify, no, iska CC zyada hai, iska color bahut badhiya hai, isko pata hai. Go to a guy who bought a Fiat Uno, which was a lemon of a car. You know that when it came to India, it flopped terribly and all that. Ask him. He'll tell you, no, but emotionally, there is all of that stuff. Logically, he also knows. That is how many decisions you have taken in your life, Guru Raj, which were actually illogical, but emotionally something that you wanted to do. So I believe that every sale, what is a sale? A sale is a person willing to part with value that they have to get perceived value. Perceived value. Who creates that perception of the value? It's the story around that. That story around that perceived. I took that Apple's example. Explain to me, why would a rational man buy a 4 lakh watch? A watch costing 4 lakh. Why would he buy? This is not, there's a Fitbit, but why would he buy? Time to mobile phone mein pata lag jata hai. Functionality is there. Oh, no, he'll buy it to show that he can afford a 4 lakh watch. Why not buy a fake then? Nowadays you get fakes which are perfect fakes. Why? You want to wear that watch. I want to wear that Rolex. I've reached that stage in my life. I want to wear a Rolex. Not for the time. It's jewelry for me. What is jewelry except emotional sale? Is it a practical sale? Buying a piece of jewelry, can it ever, I'm not saying gold jewelry. Women are intelligent that way. Men, which if you buy a watch, you won't even get half the value of that watch if you want to sell it the next day. What is it then? It is not a logical sale. It is an emotional sale. And it's indeed a very poor salesman who relies on logic to sell rather than emotions. It's a very transactional salesman. Is not a artist. I'm not saying by artist you have to fib or you have to lie. No, you have to make the imagination of that person desire that object because the person is going to get that value from it. That is real sales. So I generally think in sales also, sales is nothing but storytelling. You're on mute, Rajendra.
Yeah, Captain, one quick question, if time is of the essence, there's a very, very short time to present an elevator pitch. This question is from Gaurav Matre. Says that if time is of the essence, it's extremely critical. Where we can't have a build-up, what can one do,
Again, there are many techniques for it. I am going to use one example that I've actually done in my life. The gentleman at the other end of the phone was Mr. C.N. Ram, who was at one point of time the chief of technology of HDFC, later on one of my very, very dear mentors. I gave him a call at 9 o'clock in the morning those days in his landline. And the call was, my name is Captain Raghu Raman. I work with the Mahindra Group. And I believe we have a value proposition with which we will be able to save close to 5 crores for you every year. My number is 9910004147. I will repeat. My number is 9910004147. This was a message that I left for him at 9 o'clock. At 9:13, I got a call from him saying, where are you? I said, can you come out? Now, the point I'm making with this is you have to give a very clear value proposition. Now, later on, he asked me also, how are you saying 5 crores? You'll say, I said, no, maybe I'll say 15 crores. I don't know. But I'm talking of this range to get your, I'm not talking of some 53,000 rupees. I'm talking of in crores to be able to save for you. And that is why he wants you. He's curious. Who is this guy? He's also, he told me this, by the way, I did not know this. For me, it came from my military training. But he said, this is the first time I have been left a voicemail in which the person has repeated his number clearly and enunciated it and given enough time for me to write it. Otherwise, my number is 9. What the hell will he will not even tell the secretary to have. That clarity, that enunciation, that value proposition, not more than a 30-second call is all you need to get the interest. By the way, 9 seconds is the time of span of attention of a person, by also a goldfish, in which you have to get that hook in. So the elevator pitch will basically be your pitch. You have to make that pitch. When you make that pitch, it is about you. It is not about the product you're selling. It's not about, I'll tell you, by the way, okay, it's an anecdote, but don't. So I normally go to the same petrol pump every day, every time when I'm going to refuel my bike. And typically what happens is that in all of these petrol pumps, you have these kids nowadays who will approach you for a credit card. Credit card. So one day this kid came, and this kid is really fascinated with motorcycles also. And you can, I've been there. I've looked at motorcycles with that, I wish I had something like that. So I can recognize that look in his eyes. So this kid came to me and he became friends and all of that stuff. And I taught him a couple of techniques. I said, don't go and ask people, do you have a credit card? Ask people, sir, how is this vehicle? What is the mileage it gives? What does it happen? Don't waste your time with people whom you don't recognize. Don't go to a person who you think is not going to come again. Make your sale on the third time when the person comes. When the third time person comes, he'll recognize you, will smile at you, and then he'll say, then you tell him, he'll ask you, kaise ho sir? Zyada kuch ho nahi raha business hai. Kyun kya hua and all that. Then you lead him into that narrative, and then you make the sale. Apparently, the guy is doing much better now. So my point is that an elevator pitch, or actually every pitch is an elevator pitch. If you think somebody gave you 2 hours of time to listen to your pitch, he's made his decision in the first 5 minutes. After that, he's watching his phone. If he's watching his phone, that pitch hasn't been made. You've lost the deal. Because if a decision maker in the first 5 minutes knows that this is what he wants or she wants, he'll cut you right there and say, okay, fine, let's move to the next stage. What are the next steps to make it happen? As simple as that.
Superb. So that was really, really the last question that we took, and it's been a fabulous session since morning. And Captain, you have articulated story and telling so superbly for each one of us, and differentiated it from public speaking, and how we, with the project Katha, are going to launch this very soon in the month of October. So we are partnering and we are launching this, and please get in touch with me, Rajinder. In the meanwhile, I would love to thank Captain Raghu Raman on behalf of everybody for being there, live. And yes, it's been a real pleasure every time. We still now look forward to again catching up for a cup of coffee, very soon. Captain, we remember those days. The 6 month has taught us something different. And so we would love to have these viewers who are interested and keen to come join us, please. And it'll be a great, outstanding journey. Learn from the master himself. So thank you once again, Captain Raman. And it's brilliant. So stay healthy, and say hi to your dog from us.
I'll do that.
Don.
Dog says hi also. He's sitting here.
Don.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Viewers, stay tuned on. In the YouTube, you will find contact details, plus the last slide will play. Get in touch with OWL at 982-000-7365, or email me at rajinder@owl.today. We would love to have you join this session. These are interesting, powerful 5 modules which will transform you and your life. So that's all from now. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.